just wanted to thank everybody for joining us for this Health Service Research Association webinar. Just a little bit about the association. We were set up about 20 years ago to provide networking, education and training and build capacity in health services research. We run these webinars once a month. They're open to members and non-members, but we do encourage any non-members that are joining us to just take a bit of time to look at our website and our membership options and think about supporting us. It's only with the support of our members that we're able to run all of our events and activities. And our main activity is our biennial conference. The last one was held on the Gold Coast last December, and the next one is going to be in Auckland in December 2019. So plenty of time for members to get involved in both the planning of the conference and to submit abstracts and attend. Other activities we have are our awards and prizes, which are aimed to promote the best HSR in Australia and New Zealand, and we have just opened nominations for those awards this year, and they'll be closing at the end of July. So again, have a look at the details on our website. And probably of interest to the audience today, we also run a mentoring scheme, particularly aimed at emerging researchers, and that will be running again this year, and we'll be calling for mentors and mentees pretty soon. So keep an eye out for our bulletins and our notifications on our website again. And we have a regular news bulletin that we cover the latest HSR news and publications and jobs and career opportunities. I'm going to pass over to Tilly Payne now. Tilly's our emerging researcher coordinator on the executive committee of the association, and she's going to do the introductions and chair the session this morning. So I'll pass over to Tilly.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. I'd just like to reiterate Sarah's welcome to the HSR Association. So both Liz and I are located in Townsville, and Sarah sent out the abstract for Liz's presentation, as well as some information about her. She's got some outstanding achievements, both as a former journalist and published author. But if I may take a couple of moments to explain the relationship that we've had with Liz over the last few years, going on about 8 years now. My role is to build the capacity of allied health professionals in a hospital and health service, and Liz has been working with us over those years to increase our writing and peer-reviewed publications, and slowly and surely that's increasing. So Liz has been an amazing mentor and fantastic help, and very dedicated to helping new and emerging researchers. So I hope as many of you get a lot out of this as we certainly have here in Townsville. So thank you ahead, Liz, and I'll leave it over to you now.
Oh, thank you, Tilly. It's really lovely to be here, and it's my greatest pleasure to help new and emerging researchers get on top of the writing requirements for their research ambitions. So writing doesn't come naturally. I always say no one is born knowing how to do it. It does require what I believe is really lifelong learning, and also, I just think it's helpful to have a few pointers, or to have an experienced academic writer explain some of the concepts. So that's really what we're doing. We can only touch very lightly today because we've got a very limited amount of time, but I'm very keen, if possible, to take your questions. I've got a couple of points during this talk where I'd be very happy to take your questions. But the most important thing is you've got to realise that this is a starting point, that there's quite a bit more to do and to think about in times ahead. I strongly suggest that all of you, if you haven't already, form writing circles among peers so that you can share your writing, because scientific writing, academic writing, research writing is always public writing. You must share it and get feedback, and the more you do that, the more polished your work will become. And I strongly suggest also that you combine your writing circles with a journal club, the same group of people, critically examine new literature that's just coming out. Don't just look at the substance of it, although that's important, but also look at the way it has been written. And I think once you get beneath the surface of really good quality journal articles, then you start to appreciate the mechanics of it in your discipline as well, and you can apply that learning to what you do. So I want to introduce you to my guiding principle. I do a lot of my own writing as well as teaching writing, and so a lot of this is based on my own experience. One of the most important things you have to understand is the need for clarity, and clarity is an important keyword. There are various aspects to that word, and I just want to start today by examining some of these before we move on. Clarity really relies upon a robust understanding of the rules and conventions of written expression. So we need clear, grammatical and well-punctuated sentences to transmit thought to the audience without confusion. So in a sense, I'm inviting you to go back to basics, to pare back your writing, to think about the elements of writing, the clear, grammatical, well-punctuated sentences that go together to create a piece of scientific writing. You're always going to be thinking about the audience. Good grammar, clarity are forms of courtesy to your reader, and so it's important that you put those at the top of your list of things to achieve in this writing. Just remember that every sentence you write carries the possibility both of clear communication and of serious misunderstanding. Now, it's hard enough to get published, and there are plenty of reasons why publication can be held up. Don't let your scientific communication be one of those reasons. Always adopt clarity as your guiding principle. Now, just elaborating on that a little, another consequence of the iron rule of clarity is that you have to be exactly clear what you want to say. Sounds obvious, but it's not always obvious. The only way you can really do this is by beginning the writing earlier in the process rather than later, because writing is actually part of thinking. You cannot fully appreciate what you have found in your research until you have written about it. And clarity really comes from moving the words around, both in your head, but more importantly on the page. Get the words out and then start molding them. It's okay to have a bad or unclear first draft. Drafting is a process, but you've got to get those words out and then start moving them around and start developing clarity from there. Start interrogating what you've written to ensure that you're matching what's going on up in your brain with what's appearing on the page. Now, I also ask you to question some of your habits. We all develop habits in our writing, as in many other things that we do. I would ask you to question what I call the lazy but pervasive habits, such as the overuse of jargon and the use of cliches or hackneyed expressions. Readers actually respond to fresh expression. And of course, you're working in research, which by definition is original. Therefore, your expression should, within your disciplinary vocabulary, be as fresh as possible. New ideas demand fresh writing, and fresh writing actually aids clarity. It helps the reader to understand what you're saying. So just keeping in mind these principles of clarity and your writing circle, just to go back to that idea of a writing circle, a good writing circle will ensure that all of these things are in place because they will give you feedback about your clarity. So it's a very good idea. It sounds like you'll have a mentor process available to you through the system that we're operating in today. I strongly suggest mentors can also help guide the clarity of your written expression as well. Okay, now, as you're no doubt aware at this stage, researchers don't just do research, they must write research as well. There are very few professions that require that every stage of your work be so meticulously documented and argued. You have to be persuasive in your writing. So this is all to do, of course, with the scientific method, which is in some ways a flawed process, but really the only way we have to establish progress in understanding in our fields. And the great physicist Richard Feynman famously said, science is what we've learned about how to keep from fooling ourselves. So we have an obligation as researchers to ensure that we are contributing the smooth transfer of information to the scientific method. This is how new knowledge is created. So scientific writing that is opaque, convoluted, ambiguous, poorly argued and filled with inaccurate or technically incorrect usage is of course going to interfere with the transfer of knowledge. So we mustn't allow that to happen. Writing research therefore is not only science-based, it's language-based as well. And this is sometimes quite confronting to people who have chosen their scientific research career on the basis of the fact that they enjoy the scientific side, the research side, gathering data, analysing data. However, there's another stage as well, and I would argue that the language side, the written side, has equal importance to the data gathering. I believe that if you allow one to dominate the other, then the end result is not always what you would wish. And of course that goes in the opposite direction too. Your data gathering must be of a very high standard, but then so must your writing. So there's an aspect here of language that is very important for you to appreciate and to get on top of. So data gathering is only half the story. And bad writing certainly can slow down or prevent publication of good research. I think we all know how hard it is to get published anyway. But researchers sometimes can gather excellent data, but unless that data can be turned into good writing, its importance can certainly be lost. So time spent refining, developing your writing skills, academic writing, scientific writing, is very well spent. I'd like to just take you through a definition of scientific publication, and this is one I particularly like because I think it has a depth to it which is very helpful, particularly to those starting out. This is from the Council of Biology Editors from 1968, so it's getting on a bit now, but it's still a very solid definition that I think, no matter what your field, is going to be helpful to you. An acceptable primary scientific publication must be the first disclosure containing sufficient information to enable peers, 1, to assess observations, 2, to repeat experiments, and 3, and very importantly I think, to evaluate intellectual processes. Moreover, it must be susceptible to sensory perception, essentially permanent, available to the scientific community without restriction, and available for regular screening by one or more of the major recognised secondary services. So this is a definition that a lot of people use, not just those working in the biological sciences. And can I just get you to think carefully about all of those 3 points that are raised? That assessing observations, obviously, you need to lay out what you have found in a very, very clear, logical, step-by-step way. You must allow peers to repeat the experiments even if they are not actually going to, and replication may or may not occur, but they must be able to see how it might be possible to repeat what you've done. And number 3, to evaluate intellectual processes, which suggests that there is a laying out of the critical processes that you have used to reach your conclusion in your piece of research. So all of that must be transparent to your reader. So refer back to this definition and make sure that your scientific writing, your journal article writing, conforms to this highly desirable set of attributes. And if you can do that, I think you're well on your way. Now, I've mentioned that there's a certain rigour here, and certainly it depends upon the organised presentation of a persuasive, data-backed and clearly written argument. Most research papers on some level are persuasive. They are, you have analysed your data and you then have come to a conclusion about it, and you have to persuade your reader that your conclusion is the correct one based upon the data that you have based it on. Now, considering some of the basic skills of effective writing are going to help in this process. So I strongly suggest that you nurture your interest in language, or develop it if it doesn't already exist, by reading good writers. So have what I call writing heroes. Find the best writers in your discipline and beyond, people who write factual material, of course, but find the writers in your field who you respond to the best, and try and understand what it is that has engaged you with their particular forms of writing. I think there are some who do it a lot better than others, and if you can look critically and try and understand those that you respond to, you're probably going to find not only are they dealing in a topic that interests you, but they've been able to write it in an engaging way. It will be clear, it will be logical, it will be step by step, it will be satisfying to read. All of those things are really important, and you should emulate that in your own work. Now, before we go on, I'm very happy to take any questions you might have about academic writing, whether it relates to what I've just been talking about or more broadly. So I'll just pause now and see if Tilly would like to invite some questions and let me know whether there are any questions already available.
Liz, we had one question come up on the Q&A, which was just regarding the sharing of the slides, which Sarah has responded to whoever asked that one, and that will be up on the Health Services Research Association website in a few days' time. There's no other questions appearing at this moment, Liz. So
maybe if I can just pose a quick question then to everyone who's participating. Does anyone currently have a writing circle or journal club that you're involved in? Maybe there are no, oh, I can see there are some numbers appearing now in the Q&A. I'm very keen to know, and I'm very keen to encourage those who don't to think about a writing circle, because writing can be a bit solitary and you can go down what I call a bit of a rabbit hole if you're just doing it on your own. So you need to ground truth what you write with peers, and often the best way to do that is to gather around you a trusted small group, 4 or 5 people with whom you're happy and confident to share your material. So has anyone replied, Tilly?
So Liz, we've got a couple of questions. So one of them is, are there any good books for scientific writing that you can recommend?
There is a very good book. Now, I've just got to remember the author. Just while I turn away for 1 second, I'll just grab it from my bookcase.
While you're doing that, Liz, I will present another one of the questions, is that being mindful that we each have our own specialties but still in health, who are your writing heroes?
Oh, yes, I do have writing heroes. They're not necessarily restricted to my area, although my area is history of science, and within that I do have a writing hero, Margaret Gowing, but more broadly, George Orwell. And I think anyone who wants to be a good writer, doesn't matter what your field, certainly in health, that's also a good place. George Orwell was one of the best writers in English, and he wrote a lot of essays, including an important one which I'll mention called Politics and the English Language, which talked about not just the desirability but actually the responsibility for public sphere people, so researchers and others, to write with clarity. So I have heeded his advice my entire career. So George Orwell, you can't really go wrong, and seek out his essay, Politics in the English Language. And even if you don't read anything else from him, although I recommend you read 1984, but his essays are really excellent. Okay, any others, Tilly?
Just back to that book on scientific writing, did you find that?
I do. I've got it right here. It's called Writing Scientific Research Articles, 2nd edition. And it's by Margaret Cargill and Patrick O'Connor, and it is really good and practical. It's Australian, and I think it's nice and simple to use. It's particularly helpful for people who have English as an additional language, but it will help anyone in this field, and I have found it very helpful myself. So that would be the main one I would recommend for this kind of writing.
And just one more, Liz, and then we'll let you go on. Do you have any recommendations for a structure for a writing circle?
Yes, there are different ways of doing it. There is a process or a technique called shut up and write, which you can find on the internet, and that gives a structure. I think it's called the Pomono structure. Sorry, I can't just remember the exact word, but anyway, look up shut up and write, and that is a technique that is used by a lot of particularly research students to structure their writing workshops. But if you don't want it to be overly structured, then all you need to do is just set up a regular time. Once every 2 weeks is generally about right. That gives you enough time to have new stuff each time, and have someone who leads the conversation, and that person can change regularly, and then it could be that that person is the one who's sharing their piece of writing that particular fortnight, and then the others give their feedback. But then that person, it'll be a different person each time, with everyone getting the opportunity to share their work and getting good quality feedback from their peers. You might think that you'll just do this naturally without having to have a meeting set up, but I have found from experience that if you don't have something scheduled in your diary that everyone knows exactly what time it's happening, then you probably won't do it. So, and during that writing circle meeting, have the person who's leading the discussion also lead discussion on a current journal article that might have just come out, important for everyone, and look at the substance, but also look at the way it is written, and even get down to, you know, how many paragraphs they have written for their introduction and their conclusion, and what the paragraphs deal with, and how the keywords are used, those kinds of things. The more you get beneath the surface of scientific or academic writing, the more you're going to understand. So try and have some sort of regular meeting. It's got to be regular, otherwise people will forget or it won't happen. Every fortnight, coffee and cake, beer and pizza, whatever suits you, and organise it like that, and then you'll be able to get into the rhythm of it. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I might just move on, but there will be an opportunity at the end for a couple of questions as well. So please do save them up or send them, you know, write them so that Tilly can see them, and I'll deal with as many as I can at the end. Okay, so let's move on. I'd like to talk a bit about a way of structuring your articles. This is a traditional journal article structure known as IMRAD. It doesn't matter if your particular discipline does things slightly differently, that is, if the order of these things is different, because the concepts are going to be the same, even if it's if they're put in slightly a different order. But this is the best known formula for organising an academic paper, and I find that it's actually really helpful for breaking down the task into its constituent parts, so that you can start with the part that you feel like writing at the moment, and then you move through the others as you feel ready. So these are the different components. So there's the introduction, the methods, the results, and the discussion. So that makes up the acronym IMRAD. And it's primarily used in the hard sciences like physics and biology, but it's also widely used elsewhere as well. Some sciences move the methods to the end. Chemistry does that in particular, and others play around with the order a little bit. But generally you're going to, I think, you'll be able to conceptualise your article quite well if you think about it in terms of the very different things that each one of these sections needs to do. So it has a logic to it, and of course, like a lot of science and research, logic is very important. So think about the logic in this way. So what question or problem was studied? And the answer is in the introduction. How was the problem studied? So the answer is in the methods. What were the findings? The answer is in the results. And what do these findings mean? And the answer is in the discussion. So they're quite different sections. Of course, they're all interrelated, but you can see how you potentially could start out of order, out of sequence. In fact, Margaret Cargill, in her book that I showed you a short time ago, recommends that you begin writing the results before you write anything else. That, of course, is a bit of a personal choice, but there's something to be said, because you, perhaps while you're analysing your results, while you're working on them, you can start formulating the forms of words to express what you've found. I also quite like the idea of getting an introduction started fairly early as well, but it is up to you. What you should probably be doing is get your abstract underway quite early in the write-up process. So this is your journal article abstract, and for many journals, the abstract has to be quite short. In fact, I would say that abstracts are getting shorter all the time, and it's quite challenging. And I had one student recently who told me that he had been required to write a 100-word abstract for a journal article. I think that's quite challenging. Hopefully, generally, you'll have more like 200 to 300 words. But I think it's actually quite helpful for you to start thinking about your abstract quite early on. And then it becomes a bit of a planning document, as much as it is a summary of your work. So it also can help you get past the problem of writer's block, or of putting off, procrastinating. It's so much easier not to write than it is to write. But an abstract is just a small document, and so there's really no excuse. You have to get on with it. And of course, it also echoes the IMRAD format, but in denser, more summarised form. So that can help you to understand conceptually all the parts of the journal article. So it's another reason to get started on your abstract. And even initially, at least, start with subheadings for introduction, methods, results, and discussion. You may remove those subheadings before you submit, but it's going to help you to craft your abstract in the right order. And then you consult it often while drafting the whole paper, but of course you are open to the prospect of refining it and changing it, altering it as your understanding of your research changes, which it probably will during the process of writing, because as I said, writing is part of thinking. As you proceed through writing up your document, your own understanding is going to deepen and change, and it's going to throw up new questions that you might not have thought of while you're actually doing the research. And that's great. That's what you want. You want to very much engage with meaning in this process, and not just, write up your results. You actually have to get much deeper down into the results to understand them better. Okay, so the strategies and protocols for structuring academic papers help ensure that the information is useful, and in many cases the methodology is reproducible. And so that's why we have this IMRAD structure or similar structures, to make sure that people are receiving the information in an acceptable, expected format. So that's what it's all about. But it also, I think, really helps the author to ensure that that you have a structure to follow. Structuring is one of the hardest things. For those of you who've done a PhD, for example, you might recall how difficult it is to work out a structure for a PhD thesis. Structure can't easily be fixed at the end. It's better to be got right from the start. So it's helpful that scientific articles have this kind of structure, and you can work to it and harness it. So you're always thinking about the most logical approach to this task. So think about how your overall argument's going to form. What is the most logical way to describe what you've found? You need to, as much as you can, detach yourself from your data and thereby deepen your understanding. You're looking very much for patterns. You're looking for the big things that are coming out of what you've found, and not just the factoids within the data that you've got. But get yourself away from that a bit. Think about, what have you found? What is its meaning? What else could it mean as well? So keep an open mind. Don't lock in your conclusions too early. So think very deeply about the real meaning of your data. And fashion your findings into an intellectually coherent account that provides the most important results at the start, followed by a logical approach that leads the reader through your processes and reasoning towards a powerful and inescapable conclusion. Now, it's very easy for me to say this. It's actually quite hard to do, and I recognise that. But the more you're able to apply the techniques of critical thinking, which is a pattern-seeking process, looking for patterns of similarity, contrast, anomalies in your data, and perhaps contrasting or placing your data next to existing scholarship and finding similarities, contrasts, anomalies, those kinds of things, and then setting it out in a very logical step-by-step way that, going back to our definition of scientific publication, shows your reasoning processes and gives the reader at least the conceptual idea of how they could reproduce what you've done. And also make that conclusion inescapable. There is no other way to conclude. You show exactly how you have reached that conclusion so that the reader is led to that conclusion and can see that there is no other possible conclusion. So think about how you can do that with your data. The essence of academic writing comes down to demonstrating your capacity to think deeply about conceptually difficult ideas and finding a logical and straightforward way to explain your reasoning. So again, that sounds simple. Like a lot of things, it's simple but not easy. And it does take a little bit more time, in fact, rather a lot more time than most people think. Data gathering is also very time consuming, but the writing side of it is probably right up there in terms of time as well. You've got to allow enough time. And it's difficult. Some of you, I guess, are also clinicians, and that will take precedence. It's hard to find research time, but you've got to build in enough time to get the writing and the sort of logical approach to writing in place. So here are a few questions that might help with that. So much of what we do as researchers is actively questioning everything. That's part of the critical approach that we have to take. So you need to ask a few questions of your material. So how do your findings fit with what is already known? And it's okay if there are some anomalies there or some contrasts, because that's, you know, the things that you can talk about in your paper and account for. How do they differ? So looking for differences is a good thing, and that can raise some more research questions that could be fruitful for later as well. What conclusions can justifiably be drawn from your results when they're read in concert with existing knowledge? So of course, all journal, article, research papers have an element of literature review about them, because you have to connect up what you have found with existing knowledge. So that's your opportunity to talk about and to examine how your data might fit with existing knowledge, and by all means show where it doesn't fit and how it differs and how this might actually open up more possibilities for research. I find it quite helpful to think about what your thesis is. Now, that word is used a lot, but I want you to think about it in a very specific way in relation to your research paper. This is you being able to clearly state the core of your argument, your actual thesis. What is the reason for that journal article to even exist? The thesis is the new idea that you wish to establish in your piece of writing. And it should be new, true, and significant. And I'm basing that on the work of John Gehring. But use those words as benchmarks. What in your research is new, true, and significant? And you need all three of those. Obviously, true should go without saying. But new, yes, it definitely has to be novel. And also, perhaps the more difficult one, the significant part, you have to actually make explicit the significance of your work. And you need to think about how your work really is significant. Is it significant? So these are some of the thought processes that you need to go through to ensure that you have achieved something worthwhile. And then, of course, you have to state it clearly and effectively. Can I suggest that most people overwrite, and they write overly long sentences. They try and cram too much in. Can I suggest that, particularly when it comes to the most important parts of your research paper, where you are expressing your thesis, the new, true and significant parts of your work, that you ensure that you keep your sentences short and sharp, and use keywords well. Try to start those important sentences with your main keywords. Try and keep the grammar of your sentences relatively straightforward, not too complex. The more complex the idea, the more simple the writing should become. And if you can manage that, particularly for the important parts around your thesis within your paper, but also for the introductory parts of the paper and for the final statements for your conclusion, then you're going to really smooth the transition between what's going on in your brain and what is received by the reader. Because remember, there are lots of obstacles between what you think and what your potential reader thinks. You've got to try and reduce the number of obstacles to understanding. And that's entirely your job to do that. The reader should never have to work to understand what you mean. It's entirely up to you to make sure that you can convey everything clearly and logically and eloquently and in a fresh way, using short, sharp, clear sentences with good use of keywords. If you can do that, then you've gone a long way to establishing new knowledge in your discipline. And that's what this is all about. You are pushing back the frontiers of knowledge, which sounds very highfalutin, but that's what researchers do. Even in a very small, narrow field, that's what you're aiming to do. And to do that, you have to be very clear on what you want to say. I strongly suggest that you prepare take-home messages, and you do this during the research process itself, not later, but actually while the research is underway, because this is going to help you organise your paper. Your paper is, the organisation of it is driven by your results, by the small number of take-home messages you wish to convey. And it is a small number. It could be just one take-home message, potentially. Sometimes it might be one or two, maybe three at the most. It helps you to imagine your paper being discussed at a journal club meeting, actually. I think that's quite a good thought experiment. What are the things you would want the participants to focus on? Then just write them down. Prepare statements about these things before proceeding with the paper itself, and that's really going to focus your mind. A lot of this is about focus. So these questions are also helpful to get you focused. So what do my results say? And actually write down what they say. Keep your answer to no more than 2 sentences. What do these results mean in their context? So what conclusions can be drawn based on known knowledge in your discipline? Who needs to know about these results? So who is your audience? Always write for your audience. Think about who that audience is. If it's a cross-disciplinary audience, then you're going to have to be even clearer than you are for a more specialised audience. Why do they need to know? So what contribution will this work make to others in the field? These are all exercises you should undertake as you are working through your research process. It helps to do an outline as well, because we're structuring this in a fairly robust way. So take your main ideas of introduction, methods, results and discussion, and then break it down even further into paragraph level. Into a table structure is a good way to go. Down one side, the subsections and sub-subsections, and down the other side, show the data that you're using and the interrelationships between that data, because that's going to help you form those patterns that give you a deeper understanding of what you've found. It's got to be highly detailed, so work out how many paragraphs will be contained in the paper and what each one will be about. This is why Journal Club is good. You can actually start to see a lot of journal articles only have 2 or 3 paragraphs for the intro and maybe slightly more for the conclusion. Just work it out what's going to work best for the target journal that you're looking for, and then work from there. And you can get to the level of writing the first sentence, the theme sentence for each paragraph, and noting the backing evidence you'll present in the paragraph. Some people call this draft zero. The outline is draft zero before you even start drafting. The more you do this, the more confidence you'll have that you've got the right information to present. And create informative headings and subheadings as you go. Now, introductions help you to place your work into the discipline and make its connections explicit. So you start with fairly general statements, not too general, and then you step through to the more specific statements. So you're going to have a statement of the problem you're addressing, a background of the problem, with usually in the form of a brief literature review. You're going to state your research objective and how you achieve it in this work, and a brief description too of the conclusions you've reached. It's not a murder mystery. You actually do reveal what you found rather than waiting till the end. You're going to have a gap statement of some kind, and here are some real ones. They can just be woven into the introductory material. However, understanding how these processes interact to regulate invasions remains a major challenge in ecology. That's an example I've taken from the Cargill book, and the other one there is rather similar. You need a statement of that kind within your intro. Moving now to the discussion, skipping over methods and results because we don't really have time to look at those right now. But the discussion is a very important part. It continues the theme of the introduction by discussing the patterns that you've found in your data. And here you interpret results, but you don't just repeat them or rehash them. So it does need to be, this is where you create your synthesis. This is the new knowledge that you have created, and it's found and placed into the discussion. And from here, you go from the very particular back out to the general again, the opposite of the introduction. So you can see an hourglass shape conceptually in the form of your piece of work, moving from general to specific and then back out to general at the end. And the intro and conclusion follow the same order. So if you've established a particular order in the intro, then you maintain it through to the end, which helps the reader, gives them a satisfying consistency which they respond to. Now, people often wait too long to start writing, but you should be writing at least your theme sentences into your outline, into draft zero, while your research is still in progress, because this is your opportunity to do another form of experimentation, which is experimenting with your words. You need to find exactly the right forms of words that match what you wish to say. And doing that earlier rather than later makes the process much easier. It's also helpful to start formulating those words while the research is going on. There are colleagues around, apparatus, if that's what you're using, still available. You can test what you're trying to say. The writing process shows up problems with data or experiments ruthlessly. So it's a good idea to get that draft zero with your theme sentences well underway while your research is in progress. And I've already mentioned complex ideas should be expressed simply using straightforward sentences that are not overly complicated. Do not make everything hard for your reader, and indeed for yourself. You need to think about how to simplify your sentences. As a guide, try to ensure that the first sentence of each paragraph, which is often known as the theme sentence or the topic sentence, does not exceed 25 words. Take that as a discipline that is going to actually help you. 25 words, it's more than possible to get your theme into 25 words or fewer. Establish that as one of the things that you do as part of the discipline of this form of writing, and you'll be amazed at how much clearer your work becomes. Within a paragraph, some subsequent sentences may be between 5 and 50 words, with either extreme rare, and in fact it's good to have a mixture of sentence length. Every so often a 5-word sentence really grabs people's attention. You don't want to do that too often. 5-word sentences should be rare. On the other hand, 50-word sentences occasionally need to express a list, but don't do that too often because 50-word sentences or beyond are hard to read. So try and be disciplined with your sentence lengths. I know it sounds a bit mechanistic, but in fact, it's a really easy way to start clarifying your writing and becoming more reader-friendly. Readers like short sentences, even if some writers don't, but you've got to be reader-friendly. So try and do what they're looking for. Also, you have to be careful with the level of claim. You don't overstate your case. You have to match exactly what you've found to the forms of words. So use your language as flexibly as possible to ensure that you match it to an exact meaning. So for example, you can see the difference between the results indicate that or the results may suggest. And those levels of claim are held by the verb in your sentence. So pay particular attention. So here we've got indicate as the verb, which is stronger than may suggest. So think about levels of claim and how you wish to exactly position what you found. Now, there are three ingredients of clarity. Simplicity, I've already alluded to this, means getting straight to the point and avoiding unnecessary complexity. And that includes unnecessary grammatical complexity. And notice I'm not saying oversimplification. You mustn't oversimplify. You must find that sweet spot where you've taken a complex idea and you've expressed it as simply as possible. Familiarity means using words and ideas that your reader will recognize. So don't use jargon. Jargon is simply terminology that is unfamiliar to your audience. So try to ensure that you use a form of language, technical vocabulary of course, that matches the knowledge base of your target audience. So you need to understand who your audience is to know what will be familiar to them and tailor your writing accordingly. And visibility means creating mental pictures that the reader will see. You remember our definition of scientific publishing included the idea of it being available to the sensory perception. That's what this is about actually. Your work, the way you write, should enable people to see in their minds what you're talking about. When you can do that, you solve a lot of the problems with clarity straight away. So make sure you give examples, make sure that you give people something to grab hold of so that they can see it in their heads as they're reading, and it will make a huge difference. You've got to have sympathy for your reader. Think about what the reader needs to know and detach yourself from your work and empathize with your reader. There is such a thing as the curse of knowledge. You know your subject really well, you know your data, and you forget what it's like not to know. But you're trying to educate people through your scientific writing. You're trying to give people new knowledge that they haven't seen before. So you have to remember what it's like not to know. The more you can empathize with your reader, the more likely you are to convey your work with clarity. Readers need to understand and make use of what you've written, and they can't do that if it's impenetrable. So now that's quite a lot of dense information. I'm very happy to answer some more of your questions, but before we do that, I'll just let you know that a few slides on, there are some little, there's an exercise that you can do in your own time, a kind of a self-test exercise to see whether you can write simple, brief sentences that address some of the material you wish to place into your journal article. But just for now, let's see some of your questions.
So Liz, some of the questions were regarding the name of the book that you suggested, and for those that haven't noticed, Sarah's put that up on the chat. So it was Writing Scientific Research Articles by Margaret Cargill and Patrick O'Connor, and there's no new questions just yet.
Okay. Well, can I just pose a question once again myself and just ask whether anyone is currently in the process of drafting a research paper?
So we've got a response, yes, and I'm just going to have a look to, so there are people that are in the process of writing papers, Liz.
Okay, well, I wonder if those people who are currently writing a research paper have experienced any particular challenges in that process to date.
So one of the challenges is being concise.
Yes.
Another, Amy Tan says, I'm currently writing a paper and co-authors have suggested that I reframe the introduction to fit the results and discussion. They concurred the value of the findings. So that's one.
Yep.
Catherine Legrand says, challenge is overriding and cramming too much information into one sentence, which is exactly what you have spoken about.
Yes.
Kylie says, yes, my writing is too long and convoluted.
Yes. Split the sentences up.
Yeah. Adina says, yes, challenges in synthesizing rich qualitative findings. Now, Liz, you did talk an awful lot about, you know, the IMRAD style, which is very much for us quantitative researchers and for, you know, those rigorous scientific journals. But we do, especially in allied health, have qualitative. So do you have any comments to address that one?
I think that there is still, you can still follow the conceptual rigor of the IMRAD structure, even if the journals you're targeting have maybe, you know, different requirements. But I still think it's helpful if you can put as much rigor into writing those as well. I don't think that there's that much difference, actually, which might be a fairly controversial thing to say, but I've worked with both quantitative and qualitative researchers, and I would say that in many cases the qualitative researchers are even more rigorous when it comes to following the IMRAD pattern, you know, equally as much or more so than the quantitative researchers, but certainly there's more variety, I suppose, in the way journals in that field and that general area you know, allow journal articles to be presented. So once again, my suggestion is to find the best writers operating in that field and look beneath the surface, take it apart, get a journal club together, get a whiteboard and actually work it out on the whiteboard how those articles operate. What are the mechanics of them? How are they expressing the different aspects of, you know, the background stuff, the method stuff, the results? How are they putting together a discussion? And that's going to help you. It's difficult to be too specific in a, you know, sort of a general talk today. But I think the more that you critically examine successful literature in that field, the more likely you are to be able to do that sort of thing yourself.
Liz, we've got a comment here from Janie, which I think it would be worth commenting on if you could, please, and that's the difficulties co-authoring with people with different writing styles.
Oh, yes. This is a very important issue and a difficult issue, and it seems that author groups are getting bigger and bigger as we go along. I think it's very helpful if one person is allocated the responsibility for harmonising the style. And I think that's a discussion you can have with the author group before you even get started. You cannot have a merry mixture of styles. So you have to be able to agree on that, and planning for that and knowing that that is likely to be an issue is something that you do need to think about ahead of time. But I have found, because I've been in that position myself, I was in charge of a writing project for a whole book, actually, with a big group of writers who had quite variable writing styles, that it had to be a benevolent dictatorship. And I was in charge because that was my job, and it was all worked out ahead of time, and some of them didn't like it very much, but we had to achieve consistent quality, and we did in the end. But it can require some negotiation, but don't compromise on that. You know, just someone has to have the final word on the consistency and the style of a piece of writing before it is submitted. So negotiate that ahead of time if you possibly can.
So Liz, there's another comment here which I think might be worth your commenting on, and that's how to maintain a consistent authorial voice across different journals that demand different writing styles.
A marker of a very good researcher is flexibility, the ability to move between styles. Sometimes you're going to be publishing in an American journal, potentially, and sometimes in an Australian or a British journal. The styles are hugely different. My advice is to not be precious about it, to just submit to the style, work on it, be conscious of it, download the author style sheet and absorb it, and change your cherished way of doing things to match the journal. Because let me tell you, it's very easy for journals to reject papers. You don't want to give them any reason to do so. So become flexible, become pragmatic about the whole process, and let go of your cherished ways of doing things. Of course, you'll have your default style, the favourite style that you have, and you'll go back to that when you can. But go forth into publishing and just do whatever they want you to do and be happy about it.
There's nothing much else that's new on the question front, Liz, and I am very conscious that we're very close to time. I'm not too sure, Sarah, are we going until 12?
I think that was the idea.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we're flexible. I mean, we can run a little bit over if people will stay, if they're able to stay, or they'll start dropping off, which will give us a clue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's some questions around how to form the writing groups and sort of what to look for when you're reviewing those papers to emulate.
Okay, well, what I would be looking for is clarity of expression, of seeing whether they've clearly established background. So have a look. The important parts you're looking at will be the abstract. So take apart and look at the abstract. See whether the authors have captured the background, a brief summary of the methods, a brief summary of the results and the conclusions, and possibly whether they've made recommendations for future research, because some abstracts contain that information. So see if you can identify, break apart the abstract. That's actually a very good starting point. And identify what each part of the abstract is doing. Then I also think that it's quite helpful for you to look at the title of the journal article. What I look for is good use of the main keywords of the research, and good establishment of relationships between the keywords in the title. So you want it to be short, sharp, informative, and clear. So just decide whether or not the title of the article conforms to those words. The introduction should have, the whole thing should have an hourglass shape, and you should be able to see the hourglass shape. So you should have an opening theme sentence for the whole journal article that gives the reader an instant understanding of the territory that this paper is going to cover. So see if it does that or not. That very first sentence is really important, and the very best ones start with keywords, not with words like "it is thought that because of thee," you know, a string of words that have very little semantic content. What you really want is, if you're talking about tuberculosis, then that should be the first word. So look for that in the papers that you analyse. Also seek to do that in your own writing. But then just see that hourglass shape developing from the broad but not too broad opening, narrowing it down, getting to, okay, see if you can then identify the research problem and how that's established, the knowledge gap, the specific information about the reasoning behind even tackling this problem. See if you can identify the sentences that do that. Going to the discussion, you're looking again for the narrow focus of the paper to start broadening. So see if you can identify how it does that. The final paragraph, the final part of the paper should be basically reconnecting with existing scholarship. So taking the new knowledge that's been created and showing how it fits with existing scholarship, and even making recommendations for future research. Some of them do that. It's not always the case, but many do that. So looking throughout to see that the opening sentences of each paragraph, so the theme sentences, are short, no more than 25 words, even do word counts. You might be amazed actually how some people abuse that general rule. And think about the deployment of keywords, making sure that there are strong relationships established between the keywords. You show how a particular treatment works with a particular illness, if that's what you're talking about, but by making short, direct statements about it. So look in the papers to see whether they've done that. But the overall thing to look for is the clarity or otherwise of the piece of work and the logic or otherwise of it. Using some of the things that we've talked about today, some of the questions, what do the results say in their context, who the audience is, you know, those kinds of questions as well. So a journal club should have someone leading the discussion with a list of topics along the lines I've just described, plus anything else you can think of. And then people can have a focus and some things to talk about. And you might be amazed, because a lot of this stuff just flows past you when you're reading just for the research. But if you start reading for the mechanics of the paper, you're going to see new things. And those new things are going to help you if you wish to be someone publishing as well. So I strongly suggest that you think about looking at the nuts and bolts of how the paper's going together, and also make judgments, you know, which papers work, which don't. If something's not working, why isn't it working? See if you can figure it out and see it as a puzzle. And if you work out the puzzle, then you'll know what not to do. That sort of thing is quite helpful as well.
Thanks, Liz. We've still got quite a few people online, but they are starting to drop off. So if we can just have one last comment, and it's regarding just how much to include in that, I think in the that first draft, that outline.
Right, yes. No, that's a good question, because not everyone does an outline, but I think that your final product is greatly improved if you do. It should be quite detailed, actually. I find that it's, with the students I work with, most of them use a table structure, and the table kind of grows as their, you know, as the content expands. But what you should be doing is getting down to the level of each paragraph of the journal article. You should actually plan out. Now, you can change this when you go to your first draft. Remember, this is draft 0. But for draft 0, you should plan, for instance, to have 3 paragraphs in your introduction. What is each paragraph going to be about? Down the other column, you can start putting the elements of the literature that you wish to cite, including page numbers and things like that, to make sure that you can link it all up. You can write your theme sentences in that column as well for each of the 3 paragraphs. Then you can start plotting how to best express the methodology and break that down to paragraphs as well. You should have a paragraph by paragraph roadmap to the whole thing. Now, if you look critically at a journal article, you're going to find that they're not that long and they don't have a huge number of paragraphs. And these days, of course, journal articles, like their abstracts, are getting shorter. So I suppose 5,000 to 6,000 words is not uncommon for a journal article, but I have heard that some journals are expecting them to be rather shorter than that, you know, 3,000 to 4,000. You can easily plot it out by paragraph and write the theme sentence. Then the first draft becomes very much easier. And what I suggest is that you write out of sequence as well when you get to using your outline to draft your paper itself, is start with the results and work outwards from there. But you know, start wherever you feel like, actually, because part of doing an outline is giving you the confidence to be able to start wherever you wish, because you already have your structure in place. So you can write what you feel like writing about today, whatever that happens to be. So, but the more you plan and do a really good, strong outline, quite detailed outline, the better the final product is going to be. And it's going to ensure that you don't have to do too much structural editing, which I think is the hardest form of editing when you get to the end.
Thanks very much, Liz. So the numbers are really dropping off now, so we will wrap it up now. But, you know, as per usual, you've been very, very informative. A lot of people have commented on how helpful it has been. So thank you very much, and to all the attendees who've come in today. So thanks, Liz. And Sarah, if you have any idea whether people will be notified if it's coming up on the website, or whether they just need to check in, please.
No, I'll send around an email when it's all up on our website. Yeah, to everyone who registered. So.
Okay. So.
And also send around a link to a very short survey. It'll only be 2 or 3 questions. If you could just answer that for us, that would be great. Just how you found the webinar, and really any other topics around this sort of area of interest that we might follow up on. So that would help us with planning things that members and non-members are interested in.
So thanks for that, Sarah, and thanks, Liz. That's obviously generated a lot of interest from people. There was a lot of good questions in there, so you've done your job well.
Oh, good. Thank you. It's my pleasure. And I'll just quickly show that little exercise that people could do. It won't be to get feedback, but just to focus your minds so that you have a task to do which might help you. So there it is.
All right. So
okay.
Left on. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.